Hello. Good nodding, thank you. Good morning. My name's Carlton. This podium's quite high. I should have eaten more vegetables as a kid and see over it, but I'll stand at the side. So, I'm Carlton Gibson, as Paolo said. Thank you for the introduction, Paolo. I'm Carlton Gibson at Carlton Gibson on GitHub. I'm on Fostodon, Mastodon. Is it called Mastodon still if it's Fostodon? I don't know. Fediverse. I'm on the Fediverse there, and I've got a website where I sometimes blog, and there's a, I don't know, RSS feed or whatever. You can follow along on all of those. Today's talk is called Open Source for the Long Haul. I want to talk to you about how we build healthy habits and healthy projects, sustainable projects, so that you don't burn out and so that your projects don't fall apart the second you walk away from them. Sorry. Let me have a sip of water before I dry out with nerves. But before I go on with that, I just wanted to sort of say, well, who am I? Like, what do I know about that? Well, I mostly work on and with the Django web framework. I've been using Django essentially forever, like, forever. As part of that, I've spent basically a decade maintaining key packages in the Django ecosystem. So maybe you've heard of some of them. Django REST Framework, Django Filter, Django Crispy Forms, Django Compressor, Django AppConf. I maintain the channels trio of packages, which is channels, Daphne, channels Redis. Right? I'm a sucker for it. I'm still at it. I've just released a new one called Neapolitan, which is quick CRUD views for Django. It's my take on, how you can get your model on the page a little bit quicker. Whilst doing that, I was playing with HTMX, and there's this pattern where you want template fragments. So, if you just want to display the detail bit of your whole template, you can pull that out without having to put it into a separate template to maintain located behavior. So that's coming soon. I'm going to spin that out of the project I'm working on, and that's a sort of proof of concept of something we could add to the Django template language. I'm hoping to get that out on PyPI. Well, there's a placeholder on PyPI. I'm hoping to do that this week or next week before DjangoCon Europe. So I like open source, right? But between 2018 and 2023, just March, I was a Django Fellow. A Django Fellow I was contracted by the Django Software Foundation to work on Django itself. I'll talk more about the Django Fellowship Program a bit later on. But the point is, I've been at it a while. I believe in open source. I'm vested in it. I think it's wonderful. And if you were to come to me and you would say, hey, Carlton, should I contribute to open source? I'm going to say, heck yes. I think it's I think open source gives you wings. I've just had some energy drink from Kraken. But why? You'll work with Python every day, I presume, right? PyCon. But why should you contribute to open source? Well, open source is first and foremost, and for me, it was an investment in my business. I began contributing because I was building my business around Django and around those key handful of packages that I was using. And I needed to know that they were going to continue to work. Right? I couldn't have them just fall apart on me. By contributing to those packages, I could guarantee them, right? Maintain them. So there's that. It's an investment on your business. But open source is also a great way to learn. I've said great way to learn here. I actually think it's probably the best way to learn. You think you know your packages. You will open up the source code, triage some tickets, fix some PRs, add some new features. I promise you, you will know your package a lot better at the end of that. I was building API backends for mobile clients with Django REST Framework. So I was also helping to maintain DRF. And because of that, I was able to make those customizations and those changes that you always need. Every project, you need to do something which isn't in the docs. It's custom. But because I knew the source code, I was able to do that. And to be honest, it's some of the best source code out there. Right? You're learning from the best. You're standing on the shoulders of giants, and you're getting that exposure to it. So I think contributing to open source is a really, really good way to level up. Okay? Open source does wonders for your CV. It helps your profile. I think that applies at every single level. If you're a junior with no relevant experience at all to lean on, being able to point to a project that you're active on and say, look, this is what I'm doing. These are the contributions I've made. That shows a hiring manager exactly what you need, they're looking for. And if you're in that position, I bet you any money that nobody else applying for that job has got that open source experience to point to. So it really makes you stand out from the crowd, okay? You can't always show the work that you're working on in your job. You say, oh, can you show me some code example? Well, I can't show you the project I was working on because it's proprietary. Your contract has got some clauses in it about NDA, right? But even if it didn't have those clauses, that code is still private, right? Whereas if you work on open source, you can just point to it, you can show it. Here's what I did. And it's not just the code, it was the interactions that you had. They're all public record. It's, oh, look at this person. Aren't they able to respond in a mature and sensitive and, you know, a way that shows what they call soft skills, which I like to call professional skills. You can demonstrate those in public so that the hiring managers really see you. When I started working on REST framework, it fundamentally changed the hiring conversation. I would turn up, and instead of it being like, oh, can this guy do it? And how do we know? They were like, it was like, oh, you're using REST framework. You know I maintain that. And I'm like, yes, we know. Right? That's why you're here. And so instead of starting here, you start all the way along there. Okay? It's not instant, right? You have to build up a track record. You know, it's not the first comment on one PR doesn't change anything. But if you do that over time, you build up that track record. And working on open source projects opened an awful lot of doors for me. And it can open an awful lot of doors for you too. Okay? But more important than all of this, open source is an opportunity to give back. Investing in your business, yep, that's great. Learning, yep, that's great. Building your profile, yep, that's great. But I don't know anybody who's been at this a while who does it for that reason. Right? Yeah, those are all great reasons, but that's not why they're still around. In Python, Brett Cannon's phrase, I came for the language, but I stayed for the community. Right? That's much cited, and we mean it. Right? In Django, we have a similar thing. We say that Django is first and foremost it's a community, and then it's an ecosystem, and it's only finally a framework. Right? So the Django bit in Django is the least of it. Really is. It's the friendships we make. It's the relationships we build. They're the point of it. That's why we turn up every time. Okay? And that community is built on the individual efforts that we each put into it, be that code, be that organizing a conference here like this, or a local meetup, or answering questions on the forum, or whatever. But the community is much more than just those efforts. The community is a shared resource. It's a commons. It's a commons. It truly is. And in the modern world, I think that is a wonderful thing. And you get to be a part of it. Right? So should I contribute to open source, Carlton? Heck yes! Sorry, that energy drink just kicks in. All right. So open source. Well, so is it all roses? Well, I have to say heck no. Open source skews overwhelmingly white, male, and English speaking. The bottom line is that contributing to open source is a privilege that only a few can afford. We like to think of it as a meritocracy. You do the time. You do the hard yards working on your project. You get the rewards. Well, meritocracy, my arse, pardon. What's really going on is that pre-existing economic relations are being reinforced by you leveraging the inequality of opportunity that those economic relations provide. In English, how come that you are able to spend time building your open source profile rather than having to work 3 jobs trying to meet the basic subsistence cost of living for you and your family? The analogy outside of open source is with unpaid internships in the corporate world. The summer office job that leads to the real world offer when you're leaving school. Well, who gets those internships? Well, it's the children of middle-class professional families who can afford to support their young whilst they climb the lower rungs of the very same ladder that they themselves were once supported up. I stand here saying, yay, do open source, but knowing that in the same breath that it supports the very social status quo that I cannot in good faith condone. So open source, is it all roses? Heck no. A warning, being an open source maintainer puts your physical and mental health at risk. Maybe you rile a little bit when I talk about economic privilege. Maybe that, whoa, that doesn't feel fair. You've got a full-time job to pay. You've got a family to support. You've got a mortgage to pay. On top of all of that, you're squeezing out time in the evenings and on the weekends to work on your project. Your sacrifice, it's real. Yeah, it's a real sacrifice, sure. On top of that, you've got demanding users turning up and abusing you on your repo. Because you've got some issue in their, sorry, not you, they've got some issue in their project and apparently that's your fault. Right? And there's a serious bug in the latest version that needs a new release on PyPI ASAP. And you haven't been able to get a decent session on your feature branch in months. And people keep asking you in the discussion group about when that's going to be out. Right? All of it. Burnout is real. And with the stress of all of it, that's no wonder. Django used to be called, in humor, the meat grinder, right? It would take new contributors and it would just chew them up over the course of a year or so. We need some new meat for the meat grinder. This was a real comment in the Django community. The problem is we have bad expectations. We treat people as people treat open source maintainers like they're being paid. More than that, they treat open source maintainers like they're paying them, right? Instead of just taking their labor for free. I need a new release. I need this feature added. I need this bug fixed now. Right? It never ends. Then maintainers themselves, they come to identify as maintainers. Hey, I maintain Django. Right? But if I maintain Django, that means I'm expected to show up, and I'm expected to do so even if that's the very last thing that I should, in the whole world, that I should be doing right now. Okay? When I began in open source, I watched as heroes of mine in the Django community struggled with this problem to various degrees of full meltdown. Right? We have bad expectations. And this was the cause of the creation of the Django Fellowship Program. This is where the DSF, the Django Software Foundation, it contracts fellows to do the day-to-day work on the framework. They handle ticket triage, pull request review, releases, security patches, so on. It's the kind of thing that on a project the size of Django's, it just wouldn't happen. Okay? The current fellows are Mariusz Feliciak and Italia Bidab. I've just finished 5 years as a fellow, and I believe that the fellowship program is the reason for Django's continuing success and continuing viability. The work is still work, right? But it's not, because it's your job, not on top of the job, it's sustainable. And then the idea, hopefully, is it leaves volunteer contributors, community contributors, to do exciting things like working on the actual code. Paolo, we had an email conversation. You said I had 45 minutes. Django is 18 years old this summer, right? Despite that, we have new versions every 8 months. Every time I'm blown away with the new features. We have security releases, the LTS version, an API stability project, all of it. And all of it's made possible by the Django Fellowship Program. Python now has a developer in residence. They're going to have 2. They're hiring for a security role. That was directly inspired by the Django Fellowship Program. A few other projects are doing similar. Wagtail has paid contributors. Django CMS has a fellow role, and so on. Right? It's clearly the way forward. But it's only a few projects, and I can't say in good faith that it's a solved problem. Right? So, open source, is it all roses? Heck no. Right? And then, well, the megacorps, they don't pay a dime. Django's ORM supports PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, SQLite, Oracle out of the box. Oracle is the hardest to support. It's always extra work to support a new feature. There's always weird edge cases that need special care. It's hard to get going with locally. It's a pain to run in CI. All of it. You get the idea. But according to the Django user survey for the last few years, Oracle is used by just 2% of the Django user base. Right? So supporting Oracle is all that extra work for, say, less than 20 people out of everybody attending this entire conference. Okay? Oracle Corp had revenues of 12.4 billion US dollars in the last fiscal quarter. Okay? Oracle Corp's contributions to the Django Software Foundations. Guesses, anyone? That's right, big fat 0. Now, it's not that we haven't asked. It's not that we haven't had the conversation, but crickets, nothing. I don't want to pick on Oracle, though. Microsoft's big data database is SQL Server, and their big push is for the Azure version of that. That's what they'd like you to buy. But for Django, there's a third-party backend for SQL Server. But the kind of enterprise clients that MS sells to, they have security compliance processes. So you get Django approved with its security policies and its regular security releases and all the rest, but then you have to get the same approval for the extra dependency that's maintained by, well, who exactly? You know. What you want is just to be able to tweak your databases setting and have SQL Server just work. So what you want is for it to be part of Django core. Now, who's going to bring that server backend up, the SQL Server backend up to scratch? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to do the extra work every time we add a new feature? All the rest of it. We don't really have answers here. So there's no real prospect of SQL Server support being merged into Django core anytime soon, as much as that would be really cool to have. Like, you know, we could support SQL Server in Django, great. Right? Last fiscal quarter, Microsoft had revenues of $52.9 billion US. Microsoft contribution to the Django Software Foundation, anyone? Guesses? That's right, big fat zero. And again, it's not that we haven't had the conversation. It's not that we haven't asked. But again, crickets. Django doesn't need $1 billion. Half the cost of a single engineer annually. The cost of a single license to run a database on a single server would make a massive difference to Django, right? But that money is not possible to get. The teams are good people. They get it, I think. You know, when you speak to them, they understand. But they don't to in their budgets to make contributions, and it doesn't fit anywhere. It's not marketing. It's not engineering, and you simply can't get to someone who could make the decision to fund Django, right? You just simply could. Oh, but your Python raised money. Well, yes, Python did raise money. Headline deals with Microsoft, Facebook, Meta, Google. Those are great things, right? You can get sponsorships. Django is funded that way. But serious work goes into Python's fundraising efforts. The PSF is massive, and it's clear that we can't duplicate that at scale, right? And it's a drop in the ocean. Facebook Meta's $300,000 US funding for the Python's Developer in Residence project is awesome. Well done, Meta. But one suspects that there aren't too many more like that coming. Right? That's all you're getting. Well, in contrast, Facebook Meta had revenue of $28.64 billion US last fiscal quarter. 300,000. No. Open source is a commons. There are externalities in place such that the level of available money will always be much lower than the level that would be socially optimal. And short of the revolution, we're not going to change that anytime soon. Okay? A few projects, well, they'll do okay. Not great, but okay. The rest will survive on crumbs. So open source, is it all roses? Heck no. There's a vicious circle in the whole model of open source development. It requires volunteer effort that excludes all but the already economically privileged. That effort is parasitic on the people who give it, and it's not good for us. And the entities that profit most from the effort free ride on the common good without contributing their due. I think it's important to recognize that there are deep-seated problems without even a theoretical cure. We're looking at a classic market failure. Sometimes those can be addressed with taxation. For carbon emissions, well, maybe we could have a carbon tax, and that would change it. But democratic capitalism finds it very hard to organize against the profit centers of its major industries. Even with the threat of the climate crisis, it seems that we're unable to get, a carbon tax going. We can't do it. So it's not going to do anything about the extractive nature of open source. It's just not. Okay? So these are problems that we have to live with. There's no magic wand that's going to make them disappear. But I still believe in open source. We're not going to solve the structural problems. They're like constraints that we have to work with. But my hope is that they can be mitigated. So, what to do? It says 19 minutes here. I think I've got another 25. I'm going to give you 3 strategies that I think, even in our imperfect world, make open source sustainable in the widest sense. It's not just that you can keep it going, but within the bounds of what's feasible, you're consistently doing good. Like you're making the world a better place. Okay? I believe in open source, remember. So should you do open source? Heck yes! These strategies are nested, right? You do the first one. Then you do the second one, then you do the third one. When I was a teenager, there was a film, The Mask of Zorro. Anthony Hopkins, Antonio Banderas, Catherine Zeta-Jones. The old Zorro, and Anthony Hopkins, he had to train the young hero, Antonio Banderas, to be worthy of wearing the mask of the legendary Zorro, right? So that he could save the people from Don Diego de la Vega, the corrupt Spanish governor. Well, Hopkins had this cave with circles on the floor, and Banderas was only allowed in the middle circle until he'd mastered that, and then he was allowed to the next circle out, and only at the end was he allowed into the final ring when he could get the mask of Zorro. Well, okay, it's like that, right? Okay, so strategy 1, look after yourself, right? You have to put your own gas mask on first. Burnout is real, remember. So think about your health. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint here. And if you don't look after yourself, you're just not going to make it. Do you watch what you eat? Do you exercise? Do you get enough sleep? Do you look after your emotional well-being? These are the basics, right? You already know what you need to do here, but it's really easy to neglect them. Then limit the time that you give to open source. Correct the expectations, at least for yourself, right? You're busy. You don't have a lot of time for open source. Well, that's okay. If it's 1 hour a week, and maybe you check the odd notification when you're waiting at the bus stop, if that's all it is, then so be it. That hour adds up over time. But if you're going to keep at it over time, it needs to be sustainable. So set that limit. I do an hour on a Tuesday, and that's it, right? And then stick to it. If there's an issue that needs fixing, that's not your problem. It will wait. That's enough. If it helps, those who are actively involved in open source, they know this. You get pressure from random users on GitHub. I can't change that. After years, I don't know the solution to that. You'll maybe give yourself pressure, which is exactly what setting the limit is meant to resolve. But you will essentially never get pressure from other maintainers. As I say, they know, okay? Then take an amnesty. So there's this lovely website, volunteeramnestyday.net. Go check it out. Every solstice, take an inventory of your volunteer responsibilities, and do you know what, if it's too much, just drop some. And on Amnesty Day, you can say, do you know what, I give this up. And that's okay too. So take care of yourself. Then look after your code. Do the basics. Do testing, CI, Black, Flake 8, IPy, or this new one that does all of that, and you don't need all that, right? You've only got limited time. You can't be burning out fighting bit rot because your dependencies are out of date. Keep on top of it. Do it right, right? And then, assuming you're doing the basics, say no to new features. No, I mean it. Just say no. Just say no. So from Britain. Who's from Britain? Let's say no. Who's from Britain of my age group? Because obviously, if you're much younger, that won't mean anything. Codes that gets too complex is no fun to maintain. So can we add a hook? It's dry. But then there's hooks all over the place and you can't read your code. No, let's not add that hook. Code that gets too complex is no fun to use. Oh, can we just add another keyword arg? Well, 1% of users might want this keyword arg, but the other 99% have to read it in the docs, understand what it's for, and decide that it's not relevant to. Don't put it in. Keep your code simple. Code that no one's using is no fun to maintain. A user reports an issue, asks for a new feature, demands a new feature. You add it, but no one's using it. Not even the original reporter, because they're not using your project anymore. They disappeared, but you're stuck maintaining it. Code that you don't use is no fun to maintain, so don't add it. I mean it. Seriously, every issue, the default responses won't fix. If you can prove to me otherwise, well, fine, but the default responses won't fix. As a reporter, bear that in mind. Open source maintainers are going to close your issue as won't fix unless you can nicely persuade them otherwise. Then, third strategy, look after your community. Okay? Remember, you are not in it alone, or at least you shouldn't be. Right? You have to be willing to accept help. Remember at the beginning that we said that open source was an opportunity to give back. Well, how does it feel to a new contributor if we reject that? If you prepare a gift for someone, you wrap it, you present it, and then they say, no, I don't want it. How does that make you feel? How likely are you to try again? Okay? So if we want to build a community, we have to accept that help when it's offered. We have to accept the gifts that are given. But as maintainers, we're not very good at that. We have to learn to let go. Your project is your baby. I get it. It's your thing, right? But zoom out, I don't know, a decade. Are you still going to be triaging every ticket? Are you still going to be merging every PR? Are you still going to be doing every new release? It's worth thinking for your project, what does the long haul look like for me? Maybe it reaches end of life and you consciously wind it down and you retire it, and that's one thing, that's okay. Or do you just kind of leave it, you walk away, and there's this small little cognitive burn at the back of your mind as the issues build up over time, the unanswered issues. Is this project dead? No answer. Maybe someone picks it up, maybe someone forks it, most likely not. Or are you able to hand your project on because it wasn't just you? Were you able to let go? So accept help, right? But if you're going to accept help, you better have a list of things that people can do. Okay? This is something we're constantly battling with on Django. The contributor guide says to go and look for tickets that are marked easy pickings. Right? But on Django, there are about 940 open accepted tickets, of which exactly 7 are marked easy pickings. Okay? It's not a good place to start. It doesn't help people get off the ground. But Django's a mature project. There are no low-hanging fruit anymore, or so it goes. But that's just rubbish, right? Correct. There are very few nothing fixes, you know, like really easy ones. Those get swept up almost instantly, right? But of those 940 open accepted tickets, the very few of them are rocket science either, right? There are some that are truly hard, right? But the vast majority are no more difficult than the problems that you're all solving in your work every single day already. Yes, they need a bit of time. Yes, they need a bit of love. That's why they haven't yet been resolved. But they're not insoluble. On Django, I think we could do a much better job sometimes, a lot of the times, guiding people to those issues. Oh, I can't find anything for people to do, especially for beginners. Well, what about all those basic code tasks we talked about? If you're maintaining a Django package, updating the CI for each new version is an ongoing maintenance. And sure, you can do this yourself. No problem, it's really easy. Or you could write up the process of doing that, and you could allow a new contributor to do it. And they learn quite a lot in that process. In so doing, you create an opportunity to contribute, rather than closing it down. You create an opportunity for someone else to give back. Okay? What about the hidden work that you do? There's a whole load of things you do as a maintainer that you don't even think about. Can you identify those, and in identifying them, create a to-do list that volunteers can look at? Right? Is answering questions on the forum or social media, is that contributing? Is organising a conference like PyCon or DjangoCon, is that contributing? What about serving on a DSF board or a code of conduct team or a local meetup organising team? Is that contributing? What about doing translations? Is that contributing? What about testing on the upcoming versions of C Python so that you're ready for any breaking changes and you can feedback there? Is that contributing? Is that contributing to Python? Right? What about trying to go through the old tickets and seeing if any of them can be closed? Is that contributing? The point is that it's all contributing. Right? And saying that you can't find anything for new contributors, well, I just think that's showing a little bit of a lack of imagination. You can do it. Have things for people to do. Right? And then this is the black belt bit. This is the final ring. This is where you get your mask of Zorro. Right? Be an enabler. No, see, you say it's time out. I still think I've got quite a long way. But I haven't got much left to do. There are no general rules here. I'm just going to put up a quote by William Blake. You can read it. He who would do good to another must do it in minute particulars. I just love that. The idea is that we don't make changes with high theories and grand statements, but with minute particulars, specific, concrete changes to the world. Right? It's perfect for programmers, because if you ask, oh, how do I do good? Well, the answer is, it depends. Black belt, be an enabler. Right? So there's no general policy, but here are some ideas that we try in Django, and maybe they'll inspire you. We try and put breadcrumbs on issues and forum threads, forum questions. So an issue comes in, or a question comes in, I can make the PR myself, right? Or I can try and give a good answer that leaves just enough information for the contributor to make progress, right? One way, I'm shutting down their contribution. The other way, I'm enabling it. Now, it takes labour to do this, right? It's effort to write that good response. And it doesn't always pay off, but it's an investment in the community. Simon Charette, who's one of the main contributors to the ORM on Django, he's just amazing at this. He's a real inspiration. He always, you give links to the right bit of code and how he might, and it's just like, wow. At DjangoCon Sprints, I've run a Getting Started to Contributing Django workshop several times now. You've got a couple of hours. And the idea is that folks get a taste of getting hold of an issue on Django and becoming essentially the world expert on that issue. And then seeing that, oh yes, actually, they do have something to offer for it. Contributing to Django, it's scary, right? How could I possibly have anything to offer? But getting that taste, seeing that actually, oh yeah, I can understand this, that gets people over that first hump. Okay? In the workshop theme, the Django Girls Org runs workshops globally to give women their first taste of Django. It's the same thing, right? That's not about contributing directly, but it's the same thing. It's about widening the net of participation, about widening access. At the last DjangoCon Europe, Kojo Arisa put forward a notion of a contributor mentor who specifically plays this role of enabling new contributors to push them forwards. Maybe you're focused on the code in your project. Maybe you don't have too much time to help new contributors or not help them as much as you can. But maybe there's somebody in your community who could act as a contributor mentor to help people along, to help bridge that gap. Right? And then in Django, we're talking about opportunity grants. The economic relationships that I was talking about earlier are real. Open source skews overwhelmingly white, male, and English speaking, directly because of that. Right? If we're going to address that, then we need to mitigate those factors. Otherwise, nothing is ever going to change. Right? The exact details are still in the air. It's still discussion exactly what we're going to do. But who knows where it's going to go? Right? We're thinking it's the way forward. FDR in the days of the New Deal had this idea of priming the pump to get the economy going. It's the same here. If we can get people to the point where they have those initial contributions on their CV, then they can stand out from the crowd for the hiring manager. They can get the developer role. They can reap the economic dividend of that, and then they can pay it forward in their turn. Now, those are just some ideas, right? Breadcrumbs, workshops, mentorings, opportunity grants. However you do it, being an enabler in your community is how you help widen the net of opportunity in open source. Who knows what barrier it is that stops someone contributing? Each time that you lower that barrier for them, you're making it more accessible. It can be that action that you take that enables them to continue. Right? Now, you don't have to do it all. Am I always enabling? No, I'm not. Have I always got something for people to do? No, I don't. Am I always even open to contributions? Well, no, but I'm not, right? But it's something that I aim at. It's something to aspire to, and better than that, it gives me a recipe for ways I can try to make my projects more accessible. Just by thinking about it, it's like, ah, yes, I need to do this. So, in summary, you'll be glad to hear, Paolo, your community gives your project superpowers. What happens when the day-to-day means that you need to step back from your project for a bit? Well, if you've got a community, your project carries on. Right? What happens when your project gets popular and the new issues reports skyrocket? Well, if you've got a community, your project carries on. What happens when life changes mean it's time for you to move on from this project totally? Well, if you've got a community, your project carries on. Remember, Django is 18 years old this summer. Right? It's old enough to buy a beer. It's old enough to vote. Right? Django didn't get there because its original contributors kept going and going and going. Far from it. Django is on probably its 4th or even 5th cohort or generation of active maintainers now. Okay? That transition is only possible because of a continual effort in building, enabling, and reinforcing the community over time. What's so wonderful, it's not that, oh, so-and-so over here did it, or so-and-so over there did it. But rather it's the result of an emergent effort over years by the community itself. Right? That's magical in this world we live in. So that's it. Open source rocks, despite the problems. Heck yes, you should do it. But look after yourself, look after your code, look after your community. That's it. I hope you... I hope you've enjoyed the talk. I hope it maybe seeds some ideas on making sure that you're okay and making sure that your projects are more accessible. I'm around for the rest of the conference and, happy to talk if you'd like to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you have some question on Slido, you can. We have 5 minutes to question if you want to ask. Okay. But before question and things to do, we have to take a picture together.
Oh yeah. Come on. Right?
Okay. Say hi. Perfect. So question. You can also enter in the Slido app or in the link if you saw at the beginning. I'm checking.
Going once, going twice.
So, no question.
Okay, fine, perfect.
Okay, one question. Okay.
Okay, in English. Okay, my question would be, so you say it's all about white male talking English. I think also here in Italy, people, when they want to contribute, they talk in English, they write in English, but there's some effort. So do you think there's some way to change this? We know that the Francophone people, probably they talk in French on GitHub, for example, but it's difficult for others to contribute. So how do we solve this?
That's a great question. I've got mine. It's fine. That's a great question, Peter. I don't know the solution. It's like, how do we solve the funding problem? I don't know. I don't think we can. There's a massive domination of the English language in programming, technical literature, in programming, everything. When I was a junior, it was all very much smart and gets things done. It wasn't the same world it is now. But it was like, just learn English. Like, what are you talking about? Just learn English, doing it. But what an amazing barrier that is. I'd like to contribute to open source. Well, learn a second language first. Like, that's too hard. So what can I do? Well, I speak Spanish, so if someone comes on the forum or the repo and says something in Spanish, I can answer. Right? That's one thing you can do. You can try and make it easier. In Django, we have the docs translated into various languages. Paolo's fundamental in organizing the docs being translated into Italian, last year's sprints, I think. So, that's a good thing. But that's a massive amount of work, but it's work that's worth doing, I believe. Right? Is because you don't have to get rid of the barrier totally, but if you can just lower it so that the person can actually get their fingers on top of it and go, you've done enough. You've changed the world for better. You've done a minute particular. That's all I can offer them. There's no holy grail. Thank you.
So, another question?
Don't you think that you are a bit biased, polarized when talking about open source? Because open source is a big topic, and honestly, I have worked from big companies with 10 years, and I have a different opinion and experience also. And a question is, do you know how much it costs for a big corporation to contribute with patches? What's behind contributing a patch? Because it's not like you commit and it's done. Before going there, there's a lot of costs.
Yes, I'm absolutely biased. Absolutely, no problem with that. I see record corporate profits, and I see very little. Those barriers are real within companies. So I've spoken to teams at Microsoft about can they fund Django. I've spoken to people at Oracle about can they fund Django. And the people in the teams, they're good people, and they want to do the right thing. But the corporate structures are set up such that there's just no way. And it's a real problem. I believe it's a structural problem. And that's why I believe we won't fix it short of the revolution, essentially. Like, it's a constraint we have to work within, rather than expecting some utopia where corporations fund open source with money trees everywhere. That's not going to happen. Yes, I'm biased. Yes, my experience is different to your experience. I understand that. I understand that corporations, can I get approval to even submit this patch, right? Like, can I get time in the engineering budget to work on it? I wish companies would do more. I applaud companies that do more. I understand why they don't do more. Yeah. I agree. Yes, I'm biased. Absolutely.
We have a question from Slido. What do you suggest to start first in engaging people for a small community?
Just being friendly is the main of it. Like, so You come to a conference and you're there and it's really awkward and it's, oh, can I go up and talk to people? It's every time. We're programmers. We like to sit at our desk alone, and remote working is the best thing that ever happened to us because it means we don't have to go to the office, right? It's not just you, it's everybody. And so to come to a conference and make sure you do the Pac-Man rule and be open, and so I was standing and they weren't Pac-Manning, but they saw me and they went, yeah, do you want to join in? And they opened up. Like, that's for a small community, being welcome. You know, maybe you start a meetup in your town, it's just you. You go to a bar and you say, oh, I'm going to be here doing Python, and maybe one person turns up, they're really nervous. You just sit and have a coffee with them, now it's suddenly 2. Right? And then someone else comes along a month later, and then there's suddenly 3 of you, and then all of a sudden it's, oh, there's that meetup in that coffee. Again, minute particulars. There's no general rule, but it's like, make a small concrete change in the world each time. And those add up, and those are real. There's no recipe, but yes, that.
Thank you. Other question? Can you come here?
Just wanted to ask you if you have ever tried to interest universities to have kids contribute to the...
Good question, no. I haven't. Before settling on programming, I nearly pursued a career in academia and was mentally scarred for life from such, and so haven't been near a university in 20 years. Yeah, I mean, universities are a good, they're a good place because you've got computer science departments, you've got it, and if you can engage with those with your local university, there's a chance that you can, you know, those people will come to your meetup, or those people will form a part of your community. We had somebody emailed the DSF from their university. They wanted to do some, did we have any learning materials for Django? And we had to say, no, we don't. We don't have, but like, have some learning material for your open source project that you can point people to and say, hey, this is a thing you can do. The workshop that I've been running at the sprints, I want to turn that into a freestanding resource eventually, you know, time and limited power, but so that that can be like, people could download it, they could follow themselves, they could run the workshop themselves. And whether or not they do, it's the possibility that somebody picks that up and runs with it that maybe brings them into the community. It's the same thing here, but no, I haven't really engaged with universities on that.
So, before you, please use the Slido to ask questions for the next talk. Thank you.
So, do you have any advice for dealing with the typical father of the baby and having the conversation about how to make the community more inclusive? Like, how did you turn into what you are today?
I don't know quite what I am today, but so the maintainer who doesn't want to let go kind of thing. Yes. I think that's why the slide about asking what the long haul looks like for your project. So do the mental exercise. Well, okay, 10 years. Are you still holding on to this project all by yourself, refusing any assistance? Are you still closing new PRs and rewriting them yourself and saying, no, I've done it in this one rather than your one? Are you still being that sort of aggressive to people? Are you still rejecting those gifts a decade from now, 20 years from now? And if people aren't open to the realization that they can't do it all by themselves, then you can't force it. There are other projects where they're desperate for help and desperate for a community that you can engage with more easily than trying to sell meteors to a dinosaur. Right? Yeah, no, it's a good question.
So thank you, Ron. Unfortunately, we have finished the time for question. I will remind you to go on Slido to ask question. Also for the session this afternoon with Samantha Cristoforetti, you can put question in advance so she can answer. And thank you. Enjoy the next of the conference. And now we have the coffee break. So enjoy.